This is an introduction to the growth model for inclusion, a framework for understanding how inclusion develops in early childhood education programs over time. The model grew out of both lived experience and research, and it reflects what I came to understand about the conditions, relationships, and practices that help inclusion grow. In early childhood, quality is often measured through what is visible and observable. We look at rating systems and standards. Those things matter, but they don't always tell us whether children, families, and professionals are actually experiencing inclusion in a meaningful way. A program may appear strong on paper, while still leaving people feeling unsupported, disconnected, and unseen. For me, inclusion is not just about placement or access. It is about experience. It is whether children can fully participate, whether families feel valued and connected, or whether professionals feel supported enough to do this work well. So this framework begins with the belief that inclusion has to be experienced, not just claimed. The framework became clear through research across early childhood programs I traveled to in Western Colorado. Over 12 months, I visited 64 programs, and across those settings, I heard similar tensions. Educators were trying to meet policies and expectations while also building relationships, supporting diverse learners, and creating meaningful access to curriculum. What stood out was that people cared deeply, but the conditions shaping their work often went unrecognized. The growth model for inclusion begins with two foundational ideas: soil, S-O-I-L, and grow, G-R-O-W. I chose those words intentionally. If inclusion is something we grow, then we first have to understand the ground it grows in, and then we have to understand how people nurture growth within that environment. Soil helps explain the conditions. Grow helps explain the response. This is important because inclusion does not happen in a vacuum. Programs are shaped by things they do not fully control, like funding, policy, community resources, and dominant beliefs. At the same time, they still have agency in how they respond. They can build stronger relationships, recognize people's strengths, and create more shared responsibility. So soil and grow are connected. One helps us understand what surrounds practice, and the other helps us understand how practice takes shapes within those realities. Soil stands for spending, opportunities, ideologies, and laws. These are conditions that shape what is possible in a program before any strategy is even implemented. In other words, soil asks us to look beneath the surface. If inclusion is struggling, the question is not only what are teachers doing, the question is also what larger conditions are supporting or limiting what they will be able to do. Spending refers to the financial realities of early childhood education, including wages, benefits, staffing, and funding stability. These directly affect turnover, morale, and the ability to sustain relationships. Opportunities refers to partnerships, community supports, and external resources a program can access. These shape whether staff and families are supported in meaningful ways. Ideologies refer to beliefs and assumptions people carry about children, disabilities, behavior, language, and belonging. These often shape practice just as much as policy does. Laws refer to the regulations, standards, and policies that guide practice. They can create support, but they can also narrow practice when compliance becomes disconnected from relationships. If soil names the conditions, grow names the response. Grow stands for gifts, recognition, ownership, and weaving. These are not quick strategies or isolated interventions. They are relational ways of working that help inclusion deepen over time. Grow explains how programs respond within imperfect conditions by building on strengths, affirming people, sharing responsibility, and connecting the whole learning community. Gifts is about recognizing that every person in a program brings strengths, insight, and ways of contributing that can support inclusion. Recognition is about making people feel seen, valued, and heard, not just for what they produce, but for who they are in the community.
Ownership is about agency. People have a voice in decisions that affect them and opportunities to contribute.
Weaving is about intentionally connecting children, families, professionals, and community so that inclusion is held together through relationships rather than isolated effort.
These four responses show how programs nurture and grow as an ecosystem.
The growth model for inclusion includes 4 strands:
where barriers shaped by soil conditions and growth supported by grow practices affect the inclusion of children, families, staff, and the community. Reflective practices, curriculum, teaming and collaboration, and partnerships. These strands help us see that inclusion is not located in one activity, classroom, or a person's role. It develops across the whole program. Reflective practices are about how professionals pause, notice assumptions, and make thoughtful decisions instead of reacting automatically. Curriculum is about how environments, routines, materials, interactions, and learning experiences create or limit access, participation, and belonging for children, families, staff, and the community. Teaming and collaboration are about how adults share responsibility so inclusion does not rest on one teacher, specialist, or administrator. Partnerships are about how families, specialists, administrators, and community members become part of the larger ecosystem of support. These strands do not develop at the same pace in every program. A program may be strong in partnerships while still developing more reflective team practices. Another program may have a strong curriculum but still need more shared responsibility. Each strand matures over time. That maturation is conceptualized through 4 stages of program growth.
SEED, seed, SPROUT, sprout, TRUNK, trunk, and CANOPY, canopy. They are not rigid or linear, but they do help us notice patterns in how programs grow in depth, consistency, and their influence. Taken together, these stages reflect a developmental arc. Seed is about willingness and early exploration. Sprout is about growing awareness and structure. Trunk is about consistency and integration. And canopy is about leadership and broader impact. The stages help us see that inclusion is developmental. It becomes stronger as the conditions, relationships, and systems around it mature. The seed stage represents the beginning of the journey. Programs in this stage are defined less by polished systems and more by willingness. There's an openness to try, to learn, and to change. This stage includes seeking, experimentation, engagement, and developing trust. The work may still be informal, but the desire to grow is already present. The sprout stage marks a shift from willingness to intentional development. Programs begin recognizing gaps in practice, reflecting more honestly, and building stronger structures for collaboration and learning. This stage includes self-awareness, professionalism, relationships, openness, unity, and trust. Inclusion starts moving from isolated effort toward shared commitment. The trunk stage represents consistency and sustainability. At this point, programs are not just experimenting with inclusion. They are building systems that help inclusive practices stay in place over time. This stage includes tenacity, reflection, uplift, navigation, and knowledge. Inclusion becomes more reliable because it is embedded in routines, relationships, and all forms of decision-making. The canopy stage represents broader influence. Programs at this stage are not only sustaining inclusion internally, they are also shaping the larger system and communities around them. This stage includes community, advocacy, networks, opportunity, public presence, and yielding growth. Inclusion becomes more than a program-level practice. It becomes a contribution to the field, to the community. The growth model for inclusion is grounded in the belief that inclusion is not something we achieve through compliance alone, and it is not something that happens through isolated effort. It develops through relationships, shaped by conditions, and it deepens through reflection, shared responsibility, and a commitment to dignity and belonging for children, families, and professionals. Inclusion is not something we force into place. It is something we cultivate. Thank you for listening.